Hello, and welcome to the Administrative Office of the Court's official podcast, the Washington Courts Report, where I cover some of the most exciting news and programs happening around the Washington court system. I'm your host, Patric Haerle, and on today's episode, we're going to be discussing artificial intelligence and the impact it and other emerging technologies have on the courts and the legal system. I'll be speaking with two judges from Washington's Data Science and AI Cohort, which you'll be learning more about in just a few minutes. I recorded this conversation with Judges Lisa Mansfield and Judge Ketu Shah on Friday, November 22nd. I'm excited for you all to learn from what was an extremely informative conversation, so let's dive right in. So today, to help us learn a little bit more about AI and how it may impact the courts in Washington State, I'm excited to welcome two members of Washington State's Data Science and AI Cohort. The group started in August of 2023 as part of the National Courts Science Institute, made up of judges and court professionals from around Washington who have designated their time to learning more about AI and machine learning. So, to learn more about those, I'm excited to welcome King County Superior Court Presiding Judge Ketu Shah and Judge Magistrate at Seattle Municipal Court, Judge Lisa Mansfield. Welcome both of you, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, of course. Really excited to hear more from both of you. But just to start off, Judge Mansfield, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the Data Science and Artificial Intelligence Cohort and what your group is working on right now?
Well, it's DSAI for short, and Justice Deborah Stevens handpicked a Washington cohort, as you said, back in August of 2023, and we've really been working hand in hand with an organization called the National Courts and Sciences Institute. Now, those folks really work to enhance the capacity of courts to resolve complex cases when there are scientific and technical challenges. In that way, they contribute to the independence of the judiciary and public confidence. So that's something that we really want to do, and we really want to drill down. Our Washington State cohort, along with the national groups, want to drill down on providing judges with practical tools and the right questions, really, to ask when faced with issues dealing with AI or large language models.
Yeah, those large language models, AIs, feels like they're such big issues that are impacting every area of our lives these days and likely only going to grow. And from what I understand, Judge Shah, you were going to tell us a little bit more about the makeup of that Washington cohort.
Yeah, thank you. We have judges and administrators from throughout the state that are participating in this cohort to give us a different perspective from all across the state, as well as different levels of the court. So we have Justice Deborah Stevens, as was mentioned, as the chair of our group. We have Judge Janet Chung from the Division I Court of Appeals. We have Judge Bernard Veljasic from Division II Court of Appeals. And then we have a whole host of other people, including Ashley Cowan, who's an administrator in Spokane courts. We have Scott Hillstrom, an administrator with the AOC, Judge Jeff Smith from Spokane County District Court, Judge Allison Zip from Thurston County Superior Court, Judge Mansfield from Seattle Municipal Court, Judge Sean O'Donnell from King County Superior Court, and Judge Veronica Galvan from King County Superior Court, and of course myself from the King County Superior Court. I'm the presiding judge there.
Yeah, and one thing I immediately take away from that list is, there's court administrators, there's, some more court staff, there's presiding judge, there's a magistrate judge like Judge Mansfield, and some Court of Appeals and Supreme Court. So I feel like that makeup, from what I can tell, really helps you guys sort of get that diversity of perspectives on the group.
You're right, Patrick. We'd like to call that group Justice Partners. So we're working in partnership with folks across the system.
Absolutely. That's a great name for it. And wanting to sort of learn about a little more what these justice partners are doing, I know one of the main goals of the cohort is to create some education resources on AI and emerging technologies, and also just help improve baseline knowledge in these areas in courts around the state. Could you tell me a little bit about what some of these resources will look like and how you're hoping to improve this baseline knowledge? And we'll start with Judge Mansfield and then give Judge Shah a chance to chime in.
Sure. First of all, I want to say that here in the Northwest, we are super lucky to have access to some incredible thought leaders in this area. One of the deliverables that's already been rolled out is speaking at judicial conferences. I reached out to one of our partners in the University of Washington. His name is Professor Ryan Kalo, and I'll just give you a rundown of where he is. He's the Lane Powell and D. Wayne Gittinger Professor at the University of Washington School of Law. He's internationally recognized in the fields of emerging tech, privacy, robotics, and artificial intelligence. So we have access to his knowledge, and he came and spoke at the DMCJA spring conference last year. So that access is part of what we consider a deliverable. Also, we were working with Professor Chirag Shah at UW. He works at the Human Centered Design and Engineering School at UW. And he is also the professor at UW's Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering. So he also rolled out a PowerPoint that anybody can access. He's very generous. Anybody can access, and it's a primer on artificial intelligence. And if anybody's interested in seeing that, we could provide that information. So it's that access to education, all those resources. We're hopefully working on a bench book soon. So that's the kind of thing that we're doing in this cohort.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And we can absolutely provide that PowerPoint in the description of the YouTube or on the Washington Court's webpage where you can find this podcast. Judge Shah, do you have anything to add of projects that are being worked on?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand also how we are gaining this knowledge. We have been meeting monthly in a broader cohort that includes the entire country, so judges from all over the country. And we hear from speakers who are experts in AI and generative AI and all kinds of other information. And then there's been a few conferences where we all come together, whoever can make it, and then we listen to these experts in specific areas. So there was a conference in North Carolina that dealt with generative AI in the field of medicine and how it's being used. And then there was another conference involved with how generative AI is used in criminal and youth proceedings. And so these speakers, tell us what's going on in the industry, what research is being done in these various fields, and how AI is being used. And then we go back and then we discuss different ways of how AI might be applicable to the courts and in the law. And as Judge Mansfield says, we have been presenting at the conferences at the various levels. We presented at the DMCJA, as she mentioned, at the SCJA. We had Professor Shah come and speak. And then we had on our fall conference, which was at all court levels, we had a panel of us that have been attending these sessions to try to sort of talk about where we see AI going, how it can be used, because we know it's a extremely transformative tool, and it's being utilized at breakneck speeds. Lawyers are already using it, and so it's important for us to understand how it's being used and where it might be used. And so as part of that education, we're trying to teach folks about how it might come into your court, what sort of guardrails we should be looking for, what ethical implications are there of using AI, what does it mean for human judgment and human reasoning, and how do we think about it, because that is something we as judges do every day when we make decisions. And then working also with legislators and the BJA to give them information so that they can make policy decisions about AI and how it's going to affect the courts and the law.
Did you go to a seminar? Were you able to go to a seminar?
I did. I went to the one in North Carolina that talked about medicine and AI.
Was that the brain science one?
It was.
I went with Judge Chung to AI and genomics and genetic engineering at the Carl Woese Institute for Genomic Biology at the University of Illinois. So I mentioned that to say that this cohort has been able to meet thought leaders across the country and learn from them and take this learning back home to Washington State.
Yeah, you totally touched on something I was just thinking, which is one thing I really respect about this group's mindset is when you have such a complicated topic, two complicated topics mixing like courts and law plus AI, it's very easy to sort of take more of a narrow point of view and just kind of understand that area. But it really seems like the cohort is trying to understand AI and emerging technologies more as a whole, how they can impact everything, and then taking that general knowledge and boiling it down to Washington courts. So one thing Judge Shaw sort of touched on that is the opportunities it can offer courts and legal professionals who work in the area. And anecdotally, I think when we hear about AI, a lot of it's very maybe pessimistic, I'll use as the word. It's maybe taking a lot more of the potential negative impacts AI could have on us, starting at least more on the positive side of the coin. Judge Shaw, would you like to maybe go into depth on some of these benefits AI could offer us?
Certainly. AI it can be a tool to our benefit. It's like any tool. If you use it appropriately and with guardrails, it can be very helpful in being efficient in dealing with court administration, summarizing documents, and so forth. And like any tool, if it's misused or used inappropriately, then it can cause harm and it can cause challenges. So um, I think it's really important to think about how we can use this ethically and efficiently and productively for a tool. We've evolved over time with word processing, spell check, grammar checks, and the like, and thesauruses, and we've all learned how to use those tools effectively. And in the same way, with generative AI, we need to figure out ways to use these tools. And I've talked to lawyers, they're already using it in their briefs, in summarizing case law and presenting it. And some have done it very appropriately. They understand the kind of ethical obligations of if something is created by a tool, they need to review it and they need to make sure it's accurate and then before they submit it to the court. And there are those that have not used it well and have not double checked the work and then just submitted it. And the generative AI has produced fake hallucinations and cases and the like. And I think for judges, it's the same sort of thing. We could use AI for really helping sort of administrative tasks, maybe reviewing spreadsheets, reviewing depositions, summarizing a body of evidence. If we get 700 pages of accounting records, maybe we could use AI to help us summarize some of the content of that. At the same time, we have to double check our work. We cannot just rely on this. It is the trust and confidence of judges and the decisions they make are dependent upon judges knowing the facts and applying the law fairly. If you don't know the facts and rely on some tool that is either accurate or not accurate, that presents problems. And in the same way, you can never substitute your reasoning, your judgment with AI. And so I think there's some real opportunities to use AI maybe on the back end, helping us process information, helping us become more efficient in scheduling and calendaring and balancing caseloads. And so I think there are ways that these tools can be super helpful.
Judge Shaw,
Yeah.
if I can just jump in, I think you highlight a very important point, which is there really is no fail-safe beyond checking. I'm actually reviewing a Q&A that was led by Professor Kalo in one of our meetings, and the question was, is there a way to check accuracy without completely reviewing all the information in citations? Also, how can we rely on AI in the legal area? And his answer was, the only fail-safe we have today is to check all of the citation. So AI is a tool, as you said, Judge Shaw, but that tool has to be used responsibly. And part of that responsible use is checking the answers.
Yeah, something to increase efficiency, not to use as a crutch for your work necessarily.
Correct.
Well, I think it was touched on a little bit when you guys referenced some guardrails that would need to go up. But could you, we'll start with Judge Mansfield here, go on the other side of the coin and maybe talk a little bit about some of the risks AI could pose to the courts or the legal profession as a whole?
Okay, I think the best way to kind of lead into that is to mention one of the thought leaders in what has come to be known as algorithmic justice. Her name is Dr. Joy Buolamwini, and I'm messing her name up right now, Buolamwini, and that's
Okay.
spelled Buolamwini, Dr. Joy for short. In her book, Unmasking AI, she tells a very interesting story. She was a student at MIT, and she coded a program that used a special mirror that looked at it, would have the capability to change the appearance of your face to a superhero, a lion or dragon, or what have you. So she tried it on her own face. She's a dark brown person, but the program didn't work. So she asked her friend, who was Caucasian, to try it, and it worked perfectly fine on her. When she was alone again, she tried the mirror once more, and she was invisible to the mirror. And she happened to have a white theatrical mask nearby. She put the mask on her face and stood in front of the mirror. What do you think happened next?
I have a guess that it picked her up just fine.
It picked her up just fine. That's right. The mirror could see her perfectly fine. Of course, she wasn't invisible when she stood in front of the mirror, but to that mirror powered by AI facial recognition technology, she was not only unrecognizable, she was invisible. So I bring up this example because there's something more significant than the failing technology of a magic mirror. What we have to ask ourselves is, what happens on a larger scale when facial recognition technology, FRT for short, doesn't quote unquote see large swaths of the population? What happens when questions about healthcare benefits or who is offered a job or who gets higher education is based on determinations that are founded on data from FRTs? These are really big questions. The justice system is not immune to these issues, and that's why I bring this up in the context of our work. There's a case in point, Williams versus the city of Detroit. It's where an African-American man was wrongfully arrested in front of his friends and family and detained because the Detroit Police Department relied solely on FRTs, facial recognition technology. So the case settled, but the best thing that came out of that case was a set of guardrails that were put in place to help ensure reduction and hopefully elimination of misidentification through FRTs. And just briefly, some of the guardrails were that a lineup could never be conducted based solely on FRT technology. And when requesting and conducting an FRT search, investigators must complete, and analysts must complete detailed forms that document critical information about that search. And then if an investigation, if FRT is used, the police department must provide those forms to the prosecutor so that if there's discovery, it could be potentially exculpatory. So these are some specific guardrails that prevent harms that could occur to folks who aren't seen by the technology.
Yeah, that's so important, right? And Judge Shaw, do you have anything to add on that example?
The only thing I would add is, just as Judge Mansfield indicated, it's important that this is recognized as a tool, right? And it's one piece of information, cannot be the sole exclusive piece of information that people rely on, because there are errors. These tools make errors, and a lot of those errors are dependent upon what is fed into the generative AI. And if that generative AI is taught on a certain image or certain likeness, it's not going to recognize images that are not, it's not being taught with. And I think that's a great example of how this tool is very fallible, because of what is put into the system is what is biased. And so what comes out of the system is biased. And so these tools will have to be fine-tuned as we move along.
Yeah, and I think you raised such a good point there. This is still emerging technology that has the opportunity for potential failures in the technical area, but then also these are user-run systems that have the same thing for same chance for human error. And so, Judge Mansfield, you gave us that great example of Detroit, of those guardrails being created from an unfortunate incident with the AI. What can we do to identify those guardrails and mitigate those risks ahead of time and not have to wait for, wrongful arrests to happen and establish those guardrails after the fact?
Well, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, actually. They are doing things in Europe that we can learn from, I think. There's something called the AI Act. It's a European Union regulation that was promulgated in this year. And it is a risk-based approach. So they break down risk into 4 categories: unacceptable risk, where AI is just not used. And that would be where there's a clear threat to the safety and livelihoods and rights of people. So, for instance, if there are toys using voice assistants that encourages dangerous behavior, that would be unacceptable risk and would not be allowed. Then it would go down to high risk, which would be things like critical infrastructures like transportation or safety components of product or law enforcement. That's the example that I use. Next would be limited risk, and then minimal risk. So the guardrails are stronger and harder as the risks are increased. I think that is something that we need to, as a state, as a nation, look at. If the risk is great, shouldn't the safety be great as well? Shouldn't the guardrails be strong as well? So some of the things that we need to do are to take a look at our own, and I want to just make sure that this is not something that DSAI is doing. We're not in the regulatory business. We are about education. But I raise this because it is such an important point, and people's liberty is at risk because of some of the technologies. I just want us to do our research, and if AI is being used in a way that infringes upon anyone's rights or liberties, that we really need to know what questions to ask to make sure that it's safe and ethical.
Yeah, it seems like regulation of AI is becoming more and more of a major talking point. And if we can take some inspiration from our friends across the pond in Europe, I think we absolutely should. Judge Shaw, do you have anything to add on to that great point by Judge Mansfield?
I would say as well, the ethics around it, ethically developing AI products that are going to be used in a appropriate way. One example we learned about is there are emerging research right now about wearable technology that tries to capture your brain waves and then predict what you're feeling, thinking, or something along those lines. And the brain waves, when you're angry or upset or happy, are measurable. And then from that, they can take the readings, if you will, and try to project what you're feeling or what you're doing, and maybe create a stimulus to either help you get out of that mood or to support or amplify that mood. This technology is being developed for folks who maybe have trouble articulating themselves. Maybe they have some brain development issues. Maybe they have some negativity that they're trying to figure or work through. And so the research is sort of trying to help folks. But then there's other people who are using this technology to commercialize it and then use it for commercial purposes and selling that data to other folks who then also build on that AI data set that they're trying to develop. So again, I think you have to really be careful about what the purpose of this research is, and how they're going to use these tools. And then if they do have data that they collect, how do they share that data with other people who are wanting to use it for commercial purposes? Is that ethical? Is that appropriate? I think all of those concerns come to the forefront.
Yeah, and speaking of ethics with AI, when you raise that, yeah, it is such an important point. And from what I understand, Judge Mansfield, your sort of focus on AI is something in that area. We talked a little bit about how you are looking at racial justice in AI. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what it entails?
Well, Patrick, a lot of it has to do with the data sets aren't large enough. These machines learn from data. If there isn't enough data about folks who are not white, then the machine is going to have hallucinations or make mistakes. Have to kind of combine that with a historical mistrust of working in experiments, because folks have been harmed tremendously and been used in experiments. And so there's that a historical reticence. So the data sets are remaining small. And so the machines aren't learning as much as they should. That's just, I don't have all the answers, but I did want to raise that issue because it is a problem.
And what is interesting is that these machines, when they don't have the data set, rather than just say, well, we don't know or not sure, or, like a very human, humble response, they actually try to make things up. They just try to invent the gaps, if you will, and fill in those gaps. And as Judge Mansfield mentioned in the mirror incident, they just sort of make things up. And so that's the danger of AI as it's emerging, as it's learning, that these data sets are incomplete and flawed, that rather than the AI tools saying, well, I can't really figure it out, they just sort of make things up. And they put things in there and just try to convince you that that's the right answer. And that's what has happened with some of these briefs that have been submitted in jurisdictions. It creates a case, and you say, well, what does that case say? And then they make up another summary. And so it just keeps going on and on about trying to fill in the gaps and make things up, as opposed to going, well, actually, this case doesn't exist. And so it is something to be aware of.
Yeah, right. The AI's job is to provide an answer, so it's going to try and complete that no matter what. And I think that really ties back to what both of you were saying earlier, the importance of double checking anything you're using AI for. Moving on a little bit from some of the areas we need to work on, when you guys were both getting into it, or maybe learning more about AI, or maybe talking with other judges or staff at your courts, has there ever been any really common misconceptions about AI that you'd like to clear up now?
I think there's some misconceptions based on, Hollywood stereotypes of what AI is. And, that is way, way down the road, if ever. But what we're talking about here is a tool that is in its early stages of development. Now, the scientists and the researchers have been saying AI is learning so quickly, exponentially, that every few months there's a new iteration of an AI tool that has learned from the previous version and has gotten better. And so I think they are sounding the concern of this tool is developing so quickly without proper guardrails that there should be some slowing down of that development. So I think in misconceptions, people think, okay, we're going to be at 200 miles per hour tomorrow because it's learning so quickly, and we see all these Hollywood movies about how AI suddenly takes over the world. It's not quite like that. It's going to be in steps, but the important part is making sure we have guardrails and ethical considerations before we keep evolving in this technology.
And Judge Shaw, I think another misconception is that folks might be a little bit afraid of what they don't know, or they just feel that it's just gotten so far behind, so far ahead of them that they can't catch up. And I think that's where groups like ours can really come into play and say, hey, we are not data scientists, but we are availing ourselves of the information that's out there, and we encourage you to learn as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Don't be afraid to learn. It's important to learn about these technologies, understand how they work, and then figure out where the guardrails are. And just avoiding it and not engaging in it is not going to be helpful for your professional career.
Yeah, totally. I think you guys, in addition to the importance of checking, the work of AI, I think you guys touched on two really important points there. Of yes, it is a new, exciting technology and it's moving forward quickly, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's completely inaccessible. That people, they can learn about and learn more. And also that, yeah, it's making progress, but it's not suddenly going to be, taking over our court system tomorrow. For example, I think of all the way back in the 90s, we had the popular AI Deep Blue beating Garry Kasparov in chess. So it's been 25 years since then. So very clearly AI, while moving quickly, still has some ways to go. Well, this has been a great opportunity to learn from you two a little more about how AI is impacting the courts and some things we should be looking out for. Is there any last thoughts or messages the two of you would like to leave off on? And I'll start with Judge Mansfield.
Well, I just want folks to know that DSAI, the Data Science and Artificial Intelligence Cohort, does not have all of the answers, but we're committed to supporting justice partners and having the core competencies to ask the right questions in the face of a rapidly evolving tech space.
Absolutely. And Judge Shaw, anything to add to that?
Would add, I think, just be curious about this technology, learn about it. I think the more you learn about it, the more you'll feel comfortable with it and figure out where it's appropriate to use and where it's not appropriate to use. And I think as you get engaged with this work, it'll become more and more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to keep asking those questions and getting what answers you can. Well, I feel a little bit better about the courts having DSAI looking out for them in this area. And once again, thank you both so much for coming on the show. And you have a great rest of your day. And that's all for today's episode. Once again, a big shout out and thank you to Judge Lisa Mansfield and Judge Ketu Shah for talking to me about AI in the courts. If you're interested in learning more or looking at any of the materials discussed in today's episode, they will be linked below the YouTube description on the video or on the WA Courts podcast page, which you can find on the Washington Courts website located under the Features section of the homepage. You can listen to this episode along with past and future episodes coming out every month under Washington Courts Report on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Once again, thank you for listening to this episode of the Washington Courts Report. Have a great day.